So real quickly running through what was proposed to council. I went through the history very briefly. I don't think I need to go through that with you on why we're at this point right now and in the objectives of the park levy, the goals of the funding for the community centers, the park investments, and then working towards that consolidated entity. I explained to them we're much closer to that now operationally, being in the same building. And then I explained to them why the consolidated levy itself could be beneficial. I went into the fact that based on national averages, we are still pretty well understaffed, and our budget is not really at those national averages. And those numbers include the parks and rec districts combined already. Even though we're not, it still shows that once we combine, we're still not quite up to where national standards would dictate. Talked about the unified vision, a singular workforce, one management structure, the benefits of that. And then I dove pretty quickly into what those two levy options and 3 management structures are. We've talked about most of these pros and cons at length. The biggest change since our last meeting was the conversation that Greg Meininger and I had with the law department. They pretty much laid it on the line to us that while we agreed any of these 3 models could work operationally, the sheer time considerations of getting something accomplished with the hurdles that are there, whether that be negotiations with the union, the schools, disbanding one of the 2 entities, the park commission or the rec district, that the park commission model is probably going to be the most time efficient and simple to accomplish. That's not to say there aren't benefits to the other 3 models. It's just to say that this one's going to be the easiest to get through and accomplish what we were trying to get done. With the filing deadline, it was pretty clear, even if we weren't merging, if we were just renewing our levy and wanted it on the November 15 ballot, we would need to take action most likely at this meeting to get the law department started, to get to council approval.
And that deadline is August 15th?
August 5th.
August 5th.
And that's going to require 2 different council approvals, the county auditor's review, the Secretary of State's review. So I mean, those are 4 pretty thorough entities that are going to have to take a look at this. So after that meeting, they said, based on the fact that you have an April 8th Park Commission meeting, we would strongly recommend some type of decision comes out of there so we can move forward. Andy and I talked a little bit earlier. We think it's important that while we come out of tonight's meeting with some type of recommendation, we don't want it to appear that we're doing it without the joint rec district's consideration. So whether we take what we have tonight straight to the law department and say, hey, please move on this, or whether I prefer we do that just so they have a chance to review it, because the next rec district meeting is not until it's like the last Friday of the month. By the time the law department reviews it and gets everything to council, council will not have voted on anything before the next rec district meeting. So I think to get the ball rolling, that would be my recommendation. Not necessarily which one of the 3 do you want. I'll let you 3 discuss that. But whichever one we do, I'd at least like the law department to get started on it. Caveat on that being, if it's the joint rec district model, they will not work on it because it'll not be a city levy anymore. So just, we'll have to keep that in mind. The rec district would have to make a move to put that on the ballot. Considerations before we start the actual discussion. The 2 school districts, one of the issues with a commission is that we've discussed that Canton City Schools would no longer have formal representation on that, on our park commission. There's just not enough space to put 2 people from the commission on there, and we can't expand the commission beyond 3. However, we have a current facility and programming agreement with them between the rec district. We really just need to expand the parameters of that agreement. The question really remains, how do the schools feel about an agreement versus formal representation? It really wouldn't change how we're operating. It's just whether they decide they still would like some sort of formal representation. Plain local schools, while they make up a quarter of the city, currently they have no formal representation. That facility and programming agreement, in my opinion, there's nothing that would keep us from taking a very similar agreement from Canton City Schools, going up the Plain,
And expanding it.
and expanding it to their buildings.
How closely do we work with Plain Township?
I feel like we have a good relationship with them. We just don't do a whole lot. They kind of have their own thing up there. We work with Plain Township Parks. We did with the PCS Fest. We actually have a meeting with them Friday to talk about this year's event. I get the sense sometimes that they like working with us, but they're always kind of gun shy that it's an annexation attempt or that they're going to lose their autonomy. So I think we can work with them, and Brett May has already said, their superintendent, that he's willing to meet with us and he's trying to set up a time. So both of those entities I've contacted already and said, look, we'd like to have an individual
We're
meeting.
reaching out to them.
Yes,
Yeah,
an individual meeting for you to talk about the specific impact of these three options.
And I know Councilman Mack expressed that in the council meeting, that to make sure that, you know, if we were going to try to reach out and have a formal agreement, that we would attempt to do similar with the plain local, which, like you say, I see no reason why they would not want to, and why we couldn't be all inclusive in that regard.
The next entity, obviously, to consider is the Cjrd Stern Center. Tim's here this evening. How we would bring them into the fold if that was the route that we decided to go. It's going to be a little bit of a chicken and egg deal there, because to determine exactly how we could bring the Stern Center folks in, we have to understand how the union is going to allow some of those crew members to come in. Stern is a slightly different animal because two of their employees I would not consider union employees. They'd be more of an administrative level, so there's probably going to need to be some restructuring to our park job classifications
Right.
with council. But I'm planning on attending their board meeting on May 20.
The third Tuesday of every month.
Correct.
Okay.
So I'm planning on attending their next board meeting to talk through any questions they may have.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I may not be able to answer all of them until we have the union meeting, but I just want them to be able to ask about what that impact would be.
Sure.
That would have a impact on the budget, which we'll talk about a little bit in terms of an increase, bringing their whole operations on board. Seemed like you had a
No,
question.
no, I'll say it.
Next item is Edward Peel Community Center. That's one that is fairly unchanged by this. As long as we continue to fund them, we've got the Y contract. It would just be a question after the new levy would come into play, whether the Y would continue with their contract or we felt that we could manage them internally with recreation staff. Union employees, as I mentioned, we're going to have to meet with them to discuss our current employees and not, I know their big fear is that their seniority and their bidding rights would be jumped by new employees coming in. So we'd have to figure out how we negotiate that out. But again, that was a big piece that the law department said, that is the easiest way to get all the employees in, is to bring them into the city model as opposed to trying to go the opposite direction. We also discussed an advisory committee, since there's only 3 board members here. You know, could we have someone from Kansas City Schools, plain local, a former Cjrd Stern board member, other community members that would serve in an advisory capacity to this board for programming or any public issue that we would come across, whether that's a standing meeting or just a group that we say, look, we need your input on this. It wouldn't have a formal voting authority, but it's something that I think would be a good opportunity, and
We
it's done in
talked
other
about this through
communities.
the levy campaign.
Correct.
Yeah, and agree. You know, I'm fully would want us to go ahead and have that. I do know just from some of the objections that I have in becoming a department within the city, and having an advisory committee advising that department under that scenario, some of my objections is that there is no teeth to that advisory committee.
Correct.
And so, you know.
But I think you could give them some, you know, specific.
So I'm sure they'd be a little bit
Yeah.
reluctant from going from a full voting into an advisory, but certainly they may view that as something they don't want to. But I think, I would hope anyway, that we could work out those details as given them some type of assurance of whatever agreement we come up with.
And that's part of those conversations, to see
Yeah,
what
exactly.
exactly they want, and what they're comfortable with.
Right.
The last piece of this, which is probably the second most important point of why a park commission is probably the simplest, is that we maintain the support of all of the current city services. HR, auditor, treasurer, law department, we continue with those. Not only do we enjoy those right now, but we don't pay for them, which is a major consideration that the Joint Rec District right now has to do in-house. When you add that many employees and budget to that mix of what their current model is, that would be a major strain on their
And that's
service.
why I'm going to state the obvious, that I prefer the Canton Park Commission model for those very reasons.
Well,
But, like anything else,
Mhm.
just like, I'm sure as this evolves, we're gonna change and,
Mhm.
make compromises. But I think we should start with that model and build from there.
well, my own personal opinion is that I don't like to necessarily go to what's the most convenient
Right.
or the most simple. Expedient. You know, if it's a tough decision, I think if it's the right decision, then we should make it and move forward with that. I fully understand, your comments are towards what's the most easy things and the timely. And I agree, that plays somewhat part of any of our decisions. But I also kind of step back and say, that's not the reason why I support going forward with the park. It's just icing on the cake for me. Because I think going down this road, the only objection that I ever have with this is the fact that it is a 3-member board, and it's not as inclusive for the reasons we talked about with schools or other entities that should be a part of the recreation and park process, that because of the statutes, they don't give us that opportunity. I would hope that the city goes forward with the charter, making a vote for a charter city, which we could then restructure our park and recreation department and make it a much more inclusive and not have to be confined with the statute. My personal opinion going forward with the parks is for the very reason that there is an oversight committee, not just simply an independent board, that there is shared resources of legal, shared resources of purchasing, shared resources of the accounting, that I think it makes absolute sense to go that route, as opposed to trying to make all of those independent. And then, while I don't object to the burden of this board hiring those people, managing those people, I think it requires a much higher degree of responsibility and oversight of a board to make sure that the practices, the policies, and the controls are in place with that board to make sure that the public funds are being spent in an appropriate and in a judicial manner, that with the usage of city departments, those practices, those policies, those people, and those experts are in place to assist us moving forward in placing, and using public funds in the best, and I'll call it the safest, most judicial manner. So that's the primary reason why I continue to support. I think it's the right decision to have that involvement with, I'll call it a quasi-government entity like the park board brings to the table. I also think that from the standpoint of having a public oversight, independent board away from the department, we also serve as the check and balance that there is transparency of how levy funds are being used for public in parks and in recreations, and there is we have a certain expertise that we can continue and bring focus on parks and recreation, and we can accomplish things, I think, in a much more efficient and a much quicker fashion. And we just talked about one case in particular of what's going on with our splash park. It's been 8 years since we've had funds And for lots of reasons, and I don't mean to throw anybody under the bus, but it's been 8 years and we have accomplished nothing there. And with the right funds that we obtained 2 years ago, we can go through the laundry list of things that we've been able to accomplish during that time. And I think that this model just makes it a much, much quicker bringing results that the public should receive from those funds that are being, dedicated to the parks. And I think for that reason, not the expediency, I think from my perspective, it's the best model going forward as opposed to a recreation or something that's back underneath the, I'll call it the department within the city.
And I should have prefaced the speed and efficiency of getting this done with the fact that we've talked internally. I don't want to speak for Greg, but I know we've had those discussions about if we put all three of those on the table from an internal operations perspective, we don't see one of those three necessarily being better or worse than the other.
I
So
understand.
that was the first consideration. The second one, obviously, then is how do we get it done?
Sure.
So
Right,
I didn't want to make it sound like that was
Sure.
glossed over in those these
Right.
discussions.
But again, and that's why, again, we can talk about millages and things,
Yeah, that's the fun.
which will be the next discussion. But for me, that's why I would ask this board to consider going, whichever millage we would want to go forward with, to ask the law department to start constructing language so that we could place a levy on the ballot. That's my
We're not going with
preference.
6, that's for sure.
Well,
Well,
you want to
I-
jump
I
into
don't
that, or
agree, Frank.
if
Go
you've had a
big or go
chance,
home.
have you had a chance to look through the budgets and what our projections are?
Yeah,
Okay. And I'm sure you have also,
I have some thoughts.
okay? I guess I'll shut up at this stage, because I don't know that we need to belabor, we have the 3 points, 5, 5.5, and 6. Each one has, obviously impacts on what we're able to do and what we won't be able to do. We're looking at a 5-year.
well, that's still open for discussion. I
Okay.
personally, when we've talked about operations, I'd really rather not have to do this again in 2 years if
Yeah.
possible, and to give some continuity to
Well,
what we're trying to do. I think 5 years is
I
a
think-
standard.
What,
Number.
am I correct in that the
Yes.
recreation was a 5-year?
There are 5
So
years.
I was going to say we follow the very similar
Right.
format.
I think the only reason we went for 3 this last time is because
the-
to time up with their
Exactly.
5.
That's
So
exactly why it
I would
was.
recommend 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So in that respect, now I'll step back and I'd like to hear others' comments, inputs, agree, disagree.
If we're talking about millage, I think that whatever millage we propose has to cover our expenses. I think you mentioned one, if you go for 4, that's not enough.
No,
Overall
4
projection.
is what we are at.
Right.
5 would be a combined of what rec and us currently have. And that was what, when the 2013 campaign was our goal,
Mhm.
was to go for just the 5 mils.
Well, 5 to me is probably my breaking point, because I think it's hard to push anything past 5. The voters, there's so many constraints out here, and expenses and homeowners. So I was suggesting 5 mil. That'd be my preference. Anything more than 5 mil, I'm just a little leery about anything more than that.
Yeah, and just recognize that because the 5 mils would be a lesser amount than the current 5 mils, because our 4 mils only tax city boundaries. The 1 mil, that rec park, or the joint recreation district, taxes the entire school district, some areas outside the city. So, plus their property tax rebate adds another almost $100,000 into their coffers. So,
And just so you're aware, James mentioned pretty much all of those add-ons that the rec gets because of how old their levy is and the
Yes.
grandfather, all of that will go away. The only thing that would retain is the fact that they have a larger district. So it would still be worth more than our millage. It wouldn't be as drastic as it is right now.
So your comments you have with the rec board, what bills are you talking about here? What they suggesting? So have you talked to them about millage?
as far as the
Right.
joint recreation
Right.
district,
Mm.
we've not discussed millages. Their only
How about the rec, well,
The only discussion that we've had with them was, again, just to point out the obvious, that a 5 mil levy, if we were to create an entity that would dissolve the park board and have a joint recreation district, that their 5 mils would simply generate a larger fund because of the larger tax base that they're working with. So my only point was just make sure that, you know, you realize that while I agree that the 5 mils is combining the two, within the city residents, that doesn't make any difference, but we will lose a tax base, and so that will not generate the same amount of money that our current 4 plus their 1 represents. There is also a potential that there would be a 4% reduction in the property valuations that,
I think I read that, you said in the.
yeah, we were informed at the Joint Recreation Board meeting that to expect about a 4% reduction in the property tax for individual homeowners. They had not yet completed the assessments of business property valuations, so they don't know exactly how this would all come out in the wash. So there would be a slight reduction also just within our own, if we sustained a 4 mil levy going forward also. So do you have any thoughts with respect to what A, B, C? I mean, you think the park management arrangement, park district as opposed to an independent?
I still favor the park.
Okay.
Right. I still lean toward that.
But you know what?
Yeah.
My turn?
Okay, well,
Why
can
don't
you
you stick
hold
around
on
just
just,
a
I
minute?
think we're gonna, I'm gonna propose a,
Go ahead.
Okay, well, to be as quick as possible, I guess, I'm also in favor of the commission. I think the checks and balances, the shared services, all that stuff makes sense. So without rehashing everything, it was all well said, I'm in favor of the commission structure. And with the hopes that in the future we can expand if we go to the charter government.
okay?
So, as far as the millage, as a taxpayer, I don't find it palatable at all to have another increase in taxes. I think, especially when you're talking about combining 2 organizations to become more efficient, we're adding to the bill to the taxpayers. I understand the differences, now you're shrinking where we're drawing the money from, but personally, I find that hard to take, to say that we're gonna now ask for more money without any, I think we can sit here and say we'll do good things with the money, but it's hard to go to the public without any real tangible increase in what we're offering and say, give us more money. I also, again, with becoming more efficient, I know Derek was quoted in the repository article saying that he doesn't anticipate any layoffs. I know that's not locking in anything, and I know we're under the national average, but I think we do pretty well right now. And if now we're able to share some services with what the rec's doing right now, what we're doing, do we need the entire combined staff? I know that'll get hashed out in the future, but again, I think that can go right to the bottom line. So I think I can be easily talked into a 5 mil with what we're currently at. I am strongly against anything more than that.
Is that all you have to say?
Sure.
Well, again, I think this isn't a surprise. We've had many discussions regarding this, and rather than taking a risk of having it DOA, I'm going to put forth a motion that we direct our park director to contact the law department and put forward language or adopt language to craft language, I should say, to put a 5 mil levy on the November 2015 ballot that would fund both parks and recreation. And that if there are any other votes that need to take place, but I don't believe there are at this stage, to make that happen. And then also, I'll leave it at that. But I do want you, I
Want
do
me to
want,
make sure that we, I guess, I don't know what we're looking for from the rec district, but to see if we can
well, I was
garner
gonna-
their support as well.
yeah, I was gonna
Okay.
say, but it doesn't have to be part of this motion.
No, it
think
doesn't, I
that's
can do
independent.
that on the side.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do wanna make sure that we're also formally advising the Camp Joint Recreation that we're moving forward with that proposal, and that obviously there's ample time, but I do wanna have the law director start that process.
Okay.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just one point. and I
Yes.
Would be doing my job if I didn't.
Okay?
If we go that route,
Yes.
based on projections, with no other savings, and we've looked at this pretty hard with James Carmen and our budget director and others, year two, we're out of money and going in the wrong direction with a 5 mil levy. So I'm not sure how I mean, something would have to give, I guess, in that case, scenario, I think beyond trying to find staff reductions. Because, I mean, I'm looking at, that's with a $500,000 carryover into year one. We make it through with a $129,000 cash balance. Year two, we're at negative $240,000 and going backwards. So I have to throw that out there to make sure that if we go that route, we're gonna have to look at.
And what you budgeted there
Mhm.
were things like significant increases if we bring in, is it 8 employees?
For the joint rack,
Yes.
they're about 10, I believe.
10.
Mhm.
I mean, those are things that we're gonna have to look at as, is that a realistic assumption? I think there's a significant increase in dollars. The same thing, this may put funding towards the Southeast Community Center and J. Babe Stern Center at a lesser amount going forward. I don't know. Those are some of the consequences of this. So,
Okay, I just wanted to
and-
make that point in that
and as
projections.
Drew had said, if we're not going forward with a higher millage, which I certainly recognize, the thoughts here, that just may mean that, okay, we've got to start taking a harder stance towards increased revenues and charges that we have for the various centers and usages to increase the fees, whether that's programs or shelter reservations or facilities. There are other avenues that obviously this decision would
Sure.
make.
And we did have a pretty substantial and aggressive consolidated fees, or consolidated grants and fee revenues bumping up each year.
I
So,
understand that.
we do anticipate that as well. One other comment, if you decide to go forward this direction, if we go to council with that recommendation, there is always the possibility that they would amend this before they put it on the ballot. So if Councilman Morris's comments ring
Yeah.
true and he truly wants to go
Yeah.
big or go home, they do have the ability to amend what the commission recommends. So I just wanted everyone to be aware of that.
Very much aware of it, and I think they also recognize your sentiment of, backing tax increases.
Mhm.
This is, certainly not a palatable discussion at any time in
Mhm.
council. So it's always bravado to say go big and, or stay
It's
home.
easy for him to say that.
But,
It's our money.
Right, exactly.
but,
I happen to highlight that, unfortunately.
yeah, but I also, certainly as a similar taxpayer, understand that also carries a higher degree of risk, if you want to call it that, of us losing everything and being back to the drawing board, at a year later.
Mhm.
So,
Andy, can I recommend that because of the depth that we're discussing, that we can table this and meet again with a special meeting next week? Is that possible? That we can go more in depth with this discussion about the millage and the direction we're going?
We could. I
That's
don't
my
know that,
recommendation.
I don't know that it changes my thoughts. I mean,
Maybe you're
I'm
gonna
not
be
quite
gone.
sure, I can't do it next week, it's sort of
Okay.
have to be 2 weeks out.
Okay.
I guess,
You're okay with 5 mills? What are they recommending, what mills are they recommending? Just out of curiosity.
5, 5.5, and 6 were presented.
Those were presented. No one's recommending anything. This was simply
I think
just
it's
the,
our burden to
Yeah.
go forward with the recommendation.
But it says they want a higher millage, obviously.
they being council.
No, being that, the guys you talked to, you mentioned, some of the.
With James Carmen being
Right,
our
James,
levy
right.
treasurer, as well as, he's helped rec department on
Right.
several of the financial things. He had mentioned when we passed it 13 that he would not be surprised if we needed to seek additional millage to cover everything that we were talking about bringing in. Now, if we're talking about something different with the community centers or reduced manpower, that changes these models. But as is, bringing everything in full tilt, 5.5 would adequately cover it. 5, we would have to make adjustments to.
5.5.
But again, by the time you get to 2019, 2020, things can change
Right.
significantly, both good or bad, so.
5.5.
But I believe, the motion is on the table, I believe, right now for the 5 mil.
Correct.
Was it seconded?
No.
No.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Now I'm sort of wavering about 5.5. 5.5 does the job. The question is, will taxpayers say 5.5?
Right.
I can swallow
I-
it. 5 is a hard sell. 5.5 makes it even tougher. But, you don't want to go out and run out of money,
We've looked at this just about every direction internally, and there's not a perfect answer to this, so I think I'm just appreciative we're having the conversation and getting something to council for their approval or review.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, let's do a roll call.
Member Black,
Yes.
Member Zutali,
Yes.
Member Pelger.
And this was for 5, right?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, and the only thing I will say is that what this action tonight will do is certainly put in motion our law department. And because they will not act without a formal agreement from this board to start that process.
That's why.
And I appreciate your comments of delaying this, but I think it would delay it for probably another month. And I'd rather have this in motion, and it's a very simple change, is if the majority of others, when we have, even more discussions along these lines, think that 5.5 or 6 is a very simple strike and or an amendment that this board could go forward with. But again, I think we should really do our due diligence, more so if we really don't think that a 5 is sufficient. And I agree, I've seen the numbers, I've gone through it, but I also remember 2 years ago what our, I'll call it, promise was to the voters at that time was to go forward with combining the 2 to make the 5. And I really, really don't want to go back and say, just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. So I'd rather see it go forward at the 5 than not go forward at all by having it voted down at 5.5 or 6.
At least we're getting the ball rolling.
Yes, sir. All right. Good. Thank you. Appreciate you staying.
Thank you, Zeke.
I'll call it a department within the city.